Saul and Paul. As many people know, Paul was originally named Saul, a name that means the Great One. However, after his conversion, he changed his name to Paul, which means the Small One. After encountering a vision of Jesus, Paul was blinded for several days, his eyes covered as if with scales. Through Ananias, who was sent by the Lord, he was healed and regained his sight. When his vision returned, Paul suddenly saw the world in a new way. He understood God's kingdom and the true purpose of Christ's coming to earth, things he had never recognized before. From that moment, his life was completely transformed. On a journey that had begun with the intention of persecuting believers, Paul instead became a believer himself and devoted his life to proclaiming the gospel. Faith is not merely about changing thoughts or feelings. True faith transforms our thinking and our hearts, and this change then shapes our actions and our entire way of living. Paul's life was completely redirected, and he lived a new existence unlike the one before. Remarkably, Paul went on to write half of the books in the New Testament. Out of all the New Testament writings, 13 books were authored by him, making him one of the most prolific contributors. His ability to write so extensively came from his strong education and deep knowledge of the law, which set him apart from the other apostles. Though Paul was already highly trained in the law and rich in knowledge, his conversion opened his eyes to a far greater truth. He came to see the limits of the law and to understand God's will and providence. This new awareness made him a powerful apostle who spread the gospel throughout the world. Yet, despite his achievements, Paul referred to himself with humility. In Ephesians 3:8, he describes himself as the least of all the saints. He had once borne the name Saul, the Great One. But after meeting Christ, he realized he was not great but small. As time passed, he considered himself even lower, calling himself the least among the saints. As Paul approached the end of his life and faced martyrdom, he went further, describing himself in 1 Timothy 1:15 as the chief of sinners. At that stage, though he had accomplished so much for the gospel, he confessed himself to be the foremost of sinners. This raises a question. Was it because Paul felt he had sinned more even after preaching the gospel? Or was it because he was still wrestling with his human weakness? To understand Paul's confession, we must look beyond the idea of sin alone and focus on Paul himself. At first glance, people might think his words mean he was still committing many sins, but his declaration of being the chief of sinners was not simply a statement about sinfulness. Instead, in the context of Jesus coming to save sinners, Paul was expressing the depth of his need for salvation. He was saying that among all who need the Lord's grace, he felt his own need most strongly. When someone spends many years in any field, they usually gain deep expertise and higher standards of understanding. Yet, instead of claiming a higher moral or spiritual standing, Paul declared himself to be the one most in need of salvation. This shows two important things. First, Paul deeply recognized that without Jesus' grace, he could not stand or survive spiritually. Many people, after receiving salvation, may initially feel humble and unworthy, but over time, pride often creeps in. Paul, however, even as he neared death, never lost that humility. Second, as Paul's life became purer and further removed from sin, even small faults seemed greater to him. Just as footprints are much more visible on a white floor than on a dark one, so too did even small blemishes stand out more clearly as Paul's spirit became brighter. Paul's confession of being the chief of sinners came from this perspective, and it asks us to reflect. Do you still feel the same desperate need for Jesus' grace as you did when you first believed? Do the smallest blemishes on your soul feel significant to you, leading you to seek Him more earnestly? This is why Paul, though he had devoted his entire life to the gospel, still confessed himself to be the chief of sinners. His words invite us to consider our own spiritual state. Where do you stand today? How would you confess your faith before God? I hope this reflection leads you to search your heart deeply and hold on to the grace of Jesus with humility and gratitude.
구독, 좋아요, 알림 설정 해주세요. Subscribe, like, set notifications.